With the implementation of this particular legislation, there are the field is now open to people that historically have not been able to bill insurance companies. And so a little bit about what I'm going to talk about here is what those of you that are providers need to know, excuse me, in order to be able to bill. So one of the first things that has to happen is that you have to, as a provider, acquire something that's called an MPI, and that's a National Provider Identifier. It was started so that there was going to be kind of level the playing field, so anybody that's going to be able to file for an insurance claim has to have this MPI. For anybody that's going to bill as a health care provider or any of the insurance companies, it's really critical that you do that, and that's the first step in the process. Without that MPI, you're not going to be able to bill. Finally, in order to be able to bill, here's the link. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it in your handouts, but I'm sure that we'll be able to have it on our website, so that, or on KCAL's website, so that you should have that link available to you. And I'm just going to kind of walk through a couple of these sequence of steps that you have to go through in order to be able to get this MPI. At first, it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but the reality is that if you can work your way through it and navigate through it, it's really quite simple. The first screen that you're going to come to is, well, not the first screen, but one of the things that you have to do is you have to select what type of service it is that you're going to provide. And in this first screen here, what you'll see is that you have to select the provider type. And once you select the provider type, then they want you to select a specialty code. And so you're going to come through a series of screens that are all related to defining who you are and what kind of service you're going to provide. You have the option at that point to select another type. And so one of the things that we found over the years, thanks to Carrie Cook, who is the office manager at Integrated Behavioral Technology, she's helped navigate the system over the years. And so one of the things that she has found is that if you select this other provider type, for those of you that aren't behavior analysts or board certified behavior analysts, then you can select a screen. You come to a screen where then you can select something like case manager, and then that way that gives you a specialty code that you're going to be able to bill under. And then finally you'll come to a screen like this, and in here you can select the primary type of code that you're going to bill under. And this is what's going to identify you to the insurance companies as you go along as a provider of this particular type of service. The next thing that you have to do is, this particular slide is important for some insurance companies, but not all of them. But if you have all of these documents on file, it's for your own protection. As you start billing insurance companies, you want to make sure that you carry liability insurance, because we're out. I mean, everybody in here is familiar with autism, and autism intervention, if it's nothing else, is a hands-on intervention. And so you want to make sure that you have all the documentation that you need in order to be able to make sure you're protected and the family's protected. So as a provider, you want to carry liability insurance. As a parent, I would encourage you to ask if the provider that you select carries liability insurance, because you want to make sure you're covered. The other thing is you want to make sure that you run background checks. All insurance companies don't always require that you submit background checks with your application, but I strongly urge you as providers to make sure that you have these background checks on file. And once again, as a parent, I would want to make sure that the people that are providing services to my kids had these background checks. There's several different background checks that the state of Kansas requires for the autism waiver, and that would be CPS, which is Child Protective Services, APS, which is the Adult Protective Services, run a KBI check, which is the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and then I know on the Missouri side they require you to be fingerprinted, and so they run the fingerprint against like a federal background. I know that the military requires even local background checks for every place that you've been in the past 10 years. I think that's like really hard to do, but as parents, I would require, if nothing else, that they have a KBI and that you run them through Child Protective Services. The other thing in terms of becoming a provider that's really important that I really want to make sure that you guys get this information because it can seem really daunting. So contact Mike if you have any questions. Because it's not just a blanket application. How many state employee health plans are there? 4?
Yes.
Yeah? Each one has their own application. And so you have to get that application packet from each one of those insurance companies, and you have to fill out all the information that each one of those insurance companies wants or requires. And even though there's going to be very similar information on each one of those applications, some are going to require it in one form, some are going to require it in another form, and it's really important that you complete those applications and get that submitted on the forms that are specific to each one of those insurance companies. And so once you do that, you have to make sure that you're also including all the required documentation that goes with that, because the problem is if you don't submit it right, then it's going to get kicked back. And at the point that it gets kicked back, that's going to delay your ability to be able to provide services to kids, and it's going to delay the implementation of treatment for the kids on state employee health plan. That's really important for a couple of different reasons. The primary reason is why. Intensive early intervention is critical, and the sooner we can start intervention, the better. But the other reason is that this is a pilot project, and if we don't get good data about the utilization of this healthcare plan, it's going to hinder our progress as we try to implement this for all Kansans. So the other thing, that once you submit your documentation, I think somebody else already mentioned this, I think Lisa did, keep copies, because it's not unheard of that documentation gets lost. The other thing that you need to know is that prior to billing or filing an insurance claim, for those of us that were novel to the field as we tried to bill insurance companies, and many of you are going to come in contact with this as well, is that it's really, really important that you have all your documentation in order before you submit your claim. You need to make sure that you have notes that include things like the client's name. You can't have, if you're serving a client whose name is Matthew, but they call him Buddy, you don't want to have Buddy on your notes. The insurance claim will get kicked back. You have to have their date of birth. You have to have a client billing number. You have to have the provider's full name. You want everybody that's going to be in attendance at that meeting. You need to have the date of service. You need to have the time. If you're not using military time, you have to have AM, PM on your notes. If you don't have AM, PM on your notes, it can get kicked back, or it can get recouped. And so all the documentation must be signed at least by the provider, and as we heard earlier, for the treatment plan, it also has to be signed by the parent. And so it's really important that you have all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, because we really need to make this plan work. And even if you have to develop a checklist for things that you have to make sure that you have in order before you submit, I would do that. So now, here's a sample for those of you who have worked with me for a little bit. You know my SOAP notes. But if you look at this particular example, you'll see that it has all the elements. You know, it's pretty small up there, but you have the data service, you have persons present. I have to tell you that I made the mistake one time of putting child's name in there, and under persons present, I did not mention the child, and because of that, my claim got kicked back. So I was not able to bill because the child was not listed under persons present. And so for a lot of you guys out there, you're getting into an arena that you're not familiar with. And so I hope that this little piece of the tutorial that we're presenting tonight will really help you to be able to move forward in this process, because it's really important not just to help grow the field, right, but to address the needs of the families in the state of Kansas and these children with ASD. If you don't have all of these checks and balances in place, what's going to happen is that, that it's going to get kicked back. One of the things that you have to keep in mind too is that you always want to bill the primary insurance first, which in this case would be one of these state employee health plans. If you are a family that has a secondary insurance, or if you're a provider that's working with a family that has secondary insurance, you can only bill Medicaid or their secondary insurance once you've billed the primary insurance and have gotten denied. There are a lot of ins and outs that go in with the billing, and it can be really daunting for people that do not have a history in it, or do not have somebody who are not working for an agency that has somebody that does the billing for them. I know that if you can contact the, like a community disability organization, or I think maybe even some of the mental health providers or centers in the area, they typically have a list of people that function as billing agents. And so it's not unheard of in the mental health field, or even like small private practices, that they will use a billing agent in order to be able to file their insurance claims, because they have that expertise. So what I would encourage you to do is look at the process, see if you think that you would be good at it. If you feel uncomfortable with it, it may be for the first year that you want to contact a billing agency to have them file your claims for you. You should be able to find them on the internet, in the phone book, or like I said, at a CDDO or mental health agency. And finally, well, not finally, I still have 3 slides. For those of you that know me, there's rarely a finally. The billing codes, as we talked a little bit earlier, one of the challenges that we're going to have as a community as we move forward and try to build this stuff is some of the billing codes are really similar. Well, the code itself is identical, but the descriptor for it is different. And let's say, for example, the example that I put up here is the implementer level. And so the autism waiver defines the billing code H2019 as intensive individual support, and that's for home and community supports. It cannot duplicate school services. But the demonstration project, which is the military benefits, they define that same code, H2019, as a tutor. And the tutors, or anybody that's providing services under the military, they have to be working off the IEP. And so that's in direct contradiction to the H2019 that's for the autism waiver. The state employees health plan functions more similarly to the autism waiver, and they define it as therapeutic behavioral services, and it cannot be provided in a school. And so there are going to be some challenges as we move forward where we have that same billing code, but it's defined differently for different insurance agencies. And so I think that that can lead to challenges as we move forward. So in the new insurance, there's a series of exclusions that come up, and you know, it's difficult to know what these exclusions mean, how they're going to play out when we try to bill for them. You know, and what does it mean for service providers and for families? For example, one of the things that in looking over that we identified was that it cannot be provided, services cannot be provided in a school, but they also can't be provided in a homeschool. I know that there are a lot of families with children with autism that homeschool their kids. So at what point does the homeschool end and family time begin? So does it mean if the families choose to homeschool their kids that the services can't be provided in the home for those kids? What happens if we have a preschooler who goes to preschool, but that there are interventionists at that center that are also running an intervention clinic? Does it mean, since it's licensed as a preschool, that we can't also provide therapeutic intervention in that same setting? So those are some of the questions, I think, with the implementation of this bill that we need to be aware of, and with our folks at the state, you know, help to work that out so that the primary goal is that we're getting services in place for individuals with autism.